Hello and welcome to part 2 of this God TV special programme with the incredible Annie Chikhwaza, the mother of Malawi, in the title of Al Gibson's amazing new book. And welcome back, Annie. And in fact, we finished part 1 on a bit of a cliffhanger, really. You were being hunted down by your lovely husband's children who, worrying that they were going to lose what remained of their inheritance, decided they were going to kill you. So they descended on the home where you were camping out. What happened next?
Well, the home I was living in, and I found myself surrounded, or the house surrounded, by a group of people with machetes, with stones, with you name it, any weapon they could lay their hands on. And I saw them come towards the house. And I'd broken my back the year before that. And I realized that there was no ways I could run away because they would outrun me quite easily. So I locked all the doors and I went under the bed with the thinking that, well, you know, most of these people, they sleep on mats, perhaps they don't look under beds. I mean, it was just one of these thoughts, you know. And I went under this bed. And my first thought was, what shall I call this movie afterwards? Now, that was a very funny thought. But then, of course, I probably understood the very seriousness of the situation.
Yeah,
and I said, Father, today, if you want me dead, I will be dead. If you want me to be alive, I will be alive. And I commit myself into your hands. And then I could hear them surrounding the house. And one of my husband's daughters, who's gone now, who is no longer alive, but the only words I could hear from her was, kill her, kill her, kill her, you white bitch, kill her. And this was going on around my house, and they was throwing stones. And a little later, my husband, who had gone to the police station, arrived. And he called me through the window, and I thought, no, I'm not going to go and answer him, because if I answer him, they'll start attacking me if I come from under this bed and go to him. And then the thing is, he's going to fight on my behalf, and then we've got two bodies. Now, what's the point in having two bodies? One is going to be enough if that's the way it's going to go. So they slashed his tires, they smashed his windows of the car, and he couldn't get away in the car anymore. And his daughter told one of the young men to pick up the axe and to kill her father. Now, all of this, of course, has been told to me by my late husband. He ran away, and as he ran, the young man came after him, and the young man tripped. The angel came and tripped him, I always say. So Louis could go off into the bush and they couldn't find him anymore. But at the same time, they started to attack one of the watchmen. I had 5 watchmen around my house at that stage, and one of them had a legal firearm, and they attacked him. And as they attacked him, this firearm went off, and it killed a pregnant woman. Now, you can imagine, at that point, they were in a frenzy.
Yeah.
And they just smashed through all the doors, and they found me under the bed. It took me, you know, this part of my head is still without feeling.
Wow.
Because they pulled me there, and they obviously damaged the nerves or whatever, and they pulled me outside. But you know what? I was so cocooned in the love of God at that moment of time. I was so surrendered to Him that surrender of that moment of time, it was an amazing experience. And although, yes, I was being cut, in fact, the machete went right through my leg, I couldn't walk afterwards, and stoned and kicked and whatever it was, I was cocooned in His love.
Amazing.
And as I'm told, the police came because my tailor, I had a tailor, and my tailor had managed to run to the police station. And I always find this a very funny picture, because then the police came, 2 of them on their bicycles, to rescue me. And as the police came, they ran away. The people ran away. And I was then, apparently put in a car. Now I'm in and out of consciousness, you can well imagine. I was taken to one of the clinics nearby, the bush clinics, because we're basically in a rural area. And they stitched me up like a Sunday chicken, I always say. And from there I went to the hospital. And I was in a mess. I looked terrible. And while I was in the hospital, I was for about 8 days in hospital, they then started throwing stones on the hospital. So they found out where I was. Now, my husband was a very well-known man, so even journalists would come in and they would make pictures of me, and that would hit the headlines of the local newspapers. But what is so amazing in these situations, when you find yourself in that situation, it is what you've put on the inside. What is engrafted in your spirit. He who is joined to the Lord is one spirit with him. If you're one spirit with him, what comes out in those difficult situations is the Spirit of God manifesting itself through us, because we're the temple of the Holy Spirit. And I remember even in the hospital, all I could do was glorify God that I had come out of that situation with so many people attacking me, that I'd come out of it in one piece.
So a very different reaction this time from what you're saying, Annie, to the effect of earlier traumas and how they impacted you.
What do you do without Jesus? What do you do without a power in your life to overcome? If you don't have that, you're going to give in to the tragedies in your life. But when a calamity comes into your life, when you have the power of God dwelling on the inside of you, you ultimately create an opportunity out of that calamity.
Well, the main issue for you after this particular attempt on your life seemed to be how you were going to be able to extend forgiveness to those who had hunted you down in this way. But there's also the sense that you realised this wasn't going to be a forced process. You needed time to heal.
I had to go to South Africa for medical care. And to begin with, you can just imagine my children. I mean, their response to this whole situation, what they've done to our mother. And then, of course, my family in Holland, what they've done to our sister was very negative. And to begin with, I wanted to drown the whole of Malawi in Lake Malawi. I wanted Amnesty International know about all of this, because what was happening was that nobody was arrested. The police started investigating, and then they were threatened with death, the investigating officer. So he took his hands off it, because the commandant of the police station had said to my husband, if you would have married one of us, you wouldn't have had this problem. So it was
a justice issue. Yeah.
So I wanted the whole world to know. I even wrote to the newspapers in Malawi. But then you know what? What takes over is the power of God takes over. It is what has been imparted into my life. The scripture, which is so alive on the inside, gets the upper hand. And I then started to look at forgiveness. I started to take all the scriptures which talked about forgiveness, and I made them my own. And the day came that I could truly say, I have forgiven.
And how did you know that you'd truly forgiven?
Okay, how did I know? When I went back to Malawi, I wanted to know, because I realized that when I see the children of my husband, it's how I'm going to react from the inside. If I have negative feelings, I have not forgiven. If I have positive feelings, I have forgiven. And I couldn't wait for that. So I was told by when I got to our offices, I was told by one of our pastors that one of my husband's sons had hidden behind the building. But I mean, I went there because I wanted to see him. And it was amazing how, as I went from one child to grown-up adults, of course, but one to the other, how forgiveness had come into my life on their behalf. And the last one was the one who, was up front of the mob and said all these horrible things. And when I saw her, we were sitting in our house, and my husband and I were sitting on the chairs, and she was sitting on the floor according to tradition. And I was so overwhelmed with the feeling of having forgiven this woman, that it was like I was amazed. And when I got back into the car, I said to Louis, I said, Daddy, this is amazing. And only God can do it. It's supernatural.
Absolutely.
Because God's way is always the opposite of the world's way. And He done it His way. And He brought it into my life. And that was, and you know, my husband actually has very nice children.
Yeah.
And even today, I actually love them, you know. I really do, because they're great kids, actually, in spite of that.
Annie, that's just a brilliant testimony. And meanwhile, your story was still being interwoven with that of Rory and Wendy and
Yes.
God TV.
Yes.
And you were with them in their home, actually just down the road from me in East Molesey,
Yes.
when a fax came through confirming they had a broadcasting slot.
Yeah, that was amazing. We'd ordered Chinese food, which we had to pay, because Rory and Wendy were so poor that I always say the cockroaches were queuing up for food in that house. And the fax came through. And that was just so amazing. It was from 4 to 6 in the morning. They could
Broadcast.
They could broadcast. And that was a great rejoicing. But now I already said, okay, now we've got this far. And now, of course, we need the money for the license. And my late husband, we'd just come from America, and it's a big story on how we managed to get there. And he had still $800 in his pocket, and he took the $800 and he gave it to Rory.
Wow.
So the first person to ever give a gift to God TV was my late husband.
And a really sacrificial gift
And
as
a
well.
very sacrificial gift, because that's what he'd left. But it was worth it.
Absolutely.
Because, the way God TV has supported us through all these years.
Well, I was going to say, in fact, that then turned around, because it wasn't long after that Rory made it possible for you to get back to Malawi,
Yes.
where he was quite clear you needed to be to fulfill your vision.
Yes, and I found, one Saturday morning, I felt particularly distressed about, wanting to get back and not being unable to get back of financial constraints. And I phoned Wendy. I thought, let me phone Wendy to make her feel better. They were going through difficult times. And the best is to make somebody else feel better when you don't feel so good. Yeah. So I got Rory on the phone after that, because he says, God has spoken to me this morning. I want to know why you're not back. And I said, Rory, these are the reasons why I can't get back yet. He says, I'm coming to Johannesburg in a week's time, and you going to get back to Malawi. He then bought me a car, a bakkie, or an, what do we call it? You don't call it a bakkie. pickup,
Truck, yeah.
and he paid the rent for a house in town, because at that time I could not yet go back to the village.
Understandably, yeah.
And I had to have a house in town, but just that cost a lot of money in Malawi at that time, and especially in Malawian money. And Rory paid for 6 months for the house. It had to be paid up front for 6 months. And I drove back in this pickup.
Wow.
And the interesting part of that is that about 40 kilometers before I was in Harare, which is in Zimbabwe, I saw something across the road. And first I thought, but I was going fast, eh? I was still not very obedient when it came to that at the time. And I drove fast, and the closer I got, all of a sudden I noticed that what was lying across the road was a python, this length, the length of this room.
Wow.
And I couldn't stop anymore because of my speed, and I drove over that python. It smashed against both sides of this pickup, and the Lord said to me that the back of the serpent has been broken. Don't look back.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So you had a real prophetic sense that something had changed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the back of the serpent was broken.
Wow. And what I love, Annie, you had resources not just from Rory and Wendy and God TV and close friends. You had resources from some very unusual sources who wanted to get behind what you were doing.
Yes, yes. When I started Conda Nanni, because, everything had been destroyed. Everything I was involved with had been destroyed. And the Lord then showed me that I was to start a Caring Hands infant home with the babies, the orphan babies. And I found this terrible looking house. It seems that when it comes to myself, God puts me into homes which needs to be restored. And I found this house which needed to be restored, and it was in a really bad condition. And God, in one church, all the finances were given in one church to go and restore that whole house. And then, of course, I needed so many items. I needed the baby cots. I needed the kitchen to be done. I needed furniture for everything. And it was just amazing how everybody just came. I mean, the Hindus gave us all the cots.
That's fantastic. The Hindus recognise what God was doing.
Yes,
to you.
the Muslims, the Christians, the
Wonderful.
non-Christians.
Wonderful.
It was just a flood of items God supplied. In fact, I had so much in the kitchen that I was like Moses. I said, okay, please stop it. Father, I know I asked for all of this, but could you stop it? A flood of things. I had everything I needed. That's God,
It is God.
Liz?
And the numbers of babies you took in just grew and grew. But sadly, so did the number of babies that you lost. And I do wonder, Annie, did you ever go through times of either getting mad with God or maybe doubting that he was there or hearing you?
No, I have never ever in my life got mad with God. Neither have I ever in my life blamed God for anything, because I know him too well to know that that just isn't ever the case. And but we cried. We cry. Why do we have to lose a baby? Why? It's often it's HIV. So often this child is already born with full-blown AIDS. We went through years in Malawi where there was nothing we could do about it. Absolutely nothing. We didn't have any medicines. We didn't have a virus test. We could do another test and we'd find out, the mother was positive, but we didn't know if the child was positive. And they would just slip away. But the pain of that child, the pain I remember one child we kept alive, and tube fed him. And one of our nursing sisters said, perhaps we should just take the tube out now because the child is suffering so much. And she went and lay on the coats in my lounge, and his name was Samuel, and she laid down, she put Samuel on her tummy and said to Samuel, Samuel, you and I are going to sleep now. And if you don't want to wake up anymore, you don't have to.
Oh. So it sounds, Annie, as though you were feeling something of the heart of God for these children rather than seeing some kind of dichotomy and getting mad.
And when she woke up, Samuel had gone to the Conda Nanni Heavenly Nursery.
Heavenly Nursery, wow. Yeah. Well, by all accounts, everybody who visits Kondanani just falls in love with your beautiful babies, including Madonna, who chose her very own Mercy from your orphanage. Yeah. And it sounds as though her then husband, Guy Ritchie, found your orphanage to be completely different from the many others he'd visited.
Yeah. And so did Madonna.
Yeah.
And when I went to see them at the lodge where they were staying in Lilongwe, the first thing Guy Ritchie said to me, he said, Annie, we can't stop talking about Kondanani. And as we all sat down, he said, now I want you to tell us, and this is now their whole entourage, I want you to tell us what motivates you. Well, what a wonderful opportunity to speak into their lives, what God had done in my life. And I spent 1.5 hours talking to all of them about what God had done at Kondanani, what God had done in my life, how Kondanani had come about.
Well, Annie, you were eventually able to return to the very property where you'd been under that terrible attack. How was it returning to the very place where you'd been attacked so traumatically?
I had to get used to it. I had to adjust to sounds. I had to adjust to sounds I would hear at night, and get to a point where I was at peace and go to sleep. And I remember at some stage I was there, and my husband had changed the rules. The rules are that if they whistle, there are people around, there are burglars. Okay. So, but what he had done is he changed that, and the whistling was that everything was safe.
Oh, no.
So we had supper, and the whistle went. Well, I shot out of that house.
Gosh.
I shot out of that house into the bushes. So there was this reaction, a reaction to, and that took me a few years. I would see a lot of people together. I couldn't go, for example, to the market because there were too many people together.
Yeah.
If they came in a group, I would respond to that on the inside, and I had to work on that one. I had to work on that one. I had to get rid of the fear that would bring.
So it sounds like you paced yourself with that.
Yes. That was an evolutionary process. I remember once being on the road in Blantyre, and the Rastafarians had some kind of march, and they happened to turn up behind my car, and I left the car in the middle of the road and went into a shop, and I passed out.
Yeah,
I could not take that.
You found a way through that.
But I found a way through that, you see. And everything. Listen, we're under construction.
Yeah,
Liz.
Absolutely.
And everybody's under construction, but we've got to look for the building bricks.
And ultimately, how fantastic about the fact that the place you were left for dead became a place where others would find new life.
Yes, yes. That was so amazing. My husband, said to his children, if you want to kill my wife for this land, I'm going to sell it. He sold it to a government minister who then was kicked out of the cabinet, and he couldn't pay for the land anymore. The bank took the land back and eventually asked for a bid. I had already raised the finances, which was only God could have told me to do that. When I went to see them about the land, they told me they wanted another £10,000 from me. And I mean, we're talking about 10 years ago, it was quite a bit of money. And I told them, okay, I'll have it in a few days' time. This is what they wanted. And by the time it got to the Tuesday evening, when on the Wednesday I had to pay the extra £10,000, I hadn't received anything. And I went to bed, went to sleep, because God had said, God had spoken that the land was ours. And went to sleep. 10 to 10, the phone went. And somebody said to me here in the UK, Annie, if I give you that money, and it was somebody I'd never seen, never spoken to, Annie, if I give you that money, are you sure you're going to get the land? I said, yes. Well, she said, you have the money.
That was it.
And that was the following day I went to the bank.
Well, Conda Nanni opened eventually in 1988, and you had a very special guest.
Yeah, Rory Alec.
Rory Alec.
Yeah.
Tell me about the opening.
Well, I remember Rory arriving, and he got VIP treatment at the airport to begin with.
Yeah.
And it was obviously very exciting because God TV and the supporters of God TV had a lot to do with us being able to open Conda Nanni. And for that, we are very grateful for what, going to sow seed means you've got to go and sow good seed. And going to put seed into Conda Nanni is definitely good seed. And this is what the viewers of God TV are doing and what they have done in the past. So they are the ones who were sending Rory to Conda Nanni. They gave him the ability to do that financially and in every way, and we're so grateful for that. And when Rory was going through everything, I remember that so clearly. He was even going through my drawers, my filing cabinet, filming it, because he was so excited about the way we'd set it up. He was so happy, to see what we were doing with the finances we were given. And we just had a great time. We had a great time, and it was very exciting for us.
And you mentioned God TV viewers and Rory and Wendy getting behind the work of Conda Nanni. What about the huge cost involved in feeding this growing group of children? I mean, is that a big issue? Is that easily met? How does that work?
I think God has given us a lot of wisdom in how to deal with finances. We don't just slapdash deal with the finances God gives to us. We need a lot. We need a lot to keep the standard we have, which we want for our children. And we have a very good bookkeeping system. We have an accounting system. We have a management meeting every month. I go through every cost center with the managers of each cost center and ask them, why is it more than it was last month? That kind of thing. We don't just spend finances easily and without thinking. It doesn't come easy. There are times when I've had to believe God and say, Father, you know what's in the bank right now. But you are the manager of this project. And I would like to tell you one story, which was about 5 years ago. The accountant came into my office and he said, well, we had about £30 in the bank and over 150 children at the time. And I told him to close the door of my office, and I felt this faith rising up physically. I felt it rise up in the inside of me. And I said, Father, you heard how much is in the bank. This is your project, it's not mine. I got a telephone call about 15 minutes afterwards, and I was told that we'd had at Caring Hands, which was still in town, the baby house, there'd been a visitor and had left a good amount of money. So glory to God, that's the beginning. The next thing, about half an hour later, I get another call, and I'm told that at our gate, there is a bus with American visitors. They were Afro-Americans. They came to visit. And I still thought, oh, you know, at this time, when I'm actually having to sit here and pray, but I said, okay, let them come in. And first of all, they laid out the table with the most amazing clothing for the children.
Wonderful.
The next thing is they gave me an envelope with finances. And then I told them what had happened. And then they dished out even more dollars. And so God has his way of bringing us at times to a point where we really have got to reach out.
So you have to find faith, but it sounds as though God himself shows up when you need him to.
He does.
And although you really need funds yourself at Conda Nanni, I'm really impressed by the fact that you're also a giving orphanage. You will get behind other orphanages who are in need.
We have to. If we find out that is a great need, we will give. You know, we have to tithe as well. Lately, we've been actually giving to 2 Bible colleges where there is a Bible college for Malawian pastors who are being trained, and we've been giving to them. We've been given to orphanages. Once I was sent to an orphanage by the social welfare to have a look at the mass, and I founded a mass, and the owner was actually somebody from Scotland, and he said, he'd shown me around, and he asked me what I thought, and I told him what I thought, that it was a mess. And I said, your children are sleeping on planks. He says, well, in the villages they sleep on mats. I said, well, that's not the issue. But we couldn't leave it like that. So we sent our truck with 30 mattresses to that orphanage, so the children had mattresses.
You made sure they had mattresses.
Yeah, I couldn't criticize them and not do anything about it. So that's been very exciting, to be able to give to other orphanages, yeah.
Annie, you had a really big vision in your life, and you also had to overcome huge obstacles. What's the key, do you think, to making it through?
Making it through is thinking God's way. You know, the Word of God talks about that our minds have to be renewed. Renewed to what God would do in the particular situation you find yourself in. If somebody's angry with you, how are you going to respond? Are you going to respond and say, the Word of God says that a soft answer turns away wrath? Or are you going to react?
Okay.
If you get angry with somebody, are you going to think only a fool vents all his feelings? Or are you going to react at that person? In other words, your whole lifestyle gets in line with how would God respond
So it sounds...
in these situations. That's what we've got to do. That's the only way to respond. God's way is the only way. However, that does not mean that I never have to fire anybody at Kondanani. Because, for example, somebody took our pickup the other day, who'd never been in a car, drove it into 2 walls and smashed the truck. I mean, that's the end of you. because he had no right to do that.
Sure.
That was crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, there is a two sides to the agape love.
So it sounds as if in fulfilling the vision, you've been on a journey as well of self-development.
Yeah.
Would that be true to say?
It changes all the time. You see, you spend time with Father and you get to know him better. And you get to know his responses better. The word comes alive. And the more that becomes alive in your life, we study the Bible. We don't just read a chapter. We really, at Conda Nanni, we really study the word.
And what advice would you have for viewers who may have big visions of their own, maybe so big that they feel they're unbelievable?
You know what? If God speaks to you, he's not ever going to let you down. You either are going to doubt him and never fulfill that vision, or you're going to take that step of faith. You know, a woman or a man of faith flourishes under trials. We need to understand that. You flourish under trials. So take a step. Take that step. I've had to do it often. I just go and move. God says it, I move. And you know what? He's never let me down.
Well, Annie, you've certainly flourished. I'm sure there's lots of viewers as well who, just as much as they may have their own visions, are thinking, wow, what can I do? What could people do if they're inspired by what you've done at Conda Nanni?
You know, I just want to mention something. I was 55 when I started Conda Nanni. Come on, you're never too old. But we need people. Yeah, we need people. And even if they're 65 and they're well and strong and full of energy, come to Conda Nanni, come and work with us. We need teachers. We need a principal for our school because our principal has been with us for 4 years, is going somewhere else now. We always need people, especially at the school and especially at the nursery school.
So you need volunteers, you need people to come and work, you need teachers. What about financial support?
We need financial support, yes, in order to keep the standard we have, in order to keep and feed our children and clothe our children and give them a top-class education. We need financial support.
Annie, you've been such an inspirational guest. Thank you very much for joining me here on our God TV special. And if you would like to know more about Annie's story, do get this fantastic book, Mother of Malawi, which is available through the God TV bookshop, the proceeds of which will go straight to the work of Conda Nanni. Thank you for joining Annie and myself, and for now, goodbye and God bless from us both.